Greatness isn't just born, it's built brick by brutal brick. It's forged in the fires of chaos, refined by pain, and sharpened with obsession. Floyd Mayweather didn't just rise from the ashes, he made the ashes his throne. In a world where everyone wants the crown, few are willing to bleed for it. Fewer still are willing to lose everything just to taste it. But Floyd, he was different. Not because he wanted it more, but because he believed he had no other choice. And that's the thing about destiny. It doesn't ask permission, it demands sacrifice. And Floyd's story begins right there, in the middle of a battlefield disguised as a childhood. They say the ring is a lonely place, but Floyd was never alone. Even before he could throw a punch, his bloodline was soaked in boxing. His father, uncles, godfather, fighters all. The sound of leather on mitts was his lullaby, the gym, his playground. But for all the technique and legacy, nothing could protect a child from the crack of a gunshot at home. When he was barely 2, his father used him, yes, used him, as a human shield in a confrontation gone horribly wrong. A family gun, a shattered leg, and a trauma so deep it would echo in every step Floyd took for the rest of his life. To survive in Grand Rapids wasn't just about being tough, it was about being invisible. Street corners whispered threats, friends vanished. Sirens weren't rare, they were routine. But what cut deepest wasn't what happened outside. It was what happened inside his own home. 7 people packed into one bedroom. A mother battling demons with a pipe. A father who disappeared into the underworld of drugs, re-emerging only in headlines and handcuffs. And yet, amid the chaos, a strange sort of clarity. Floyd knew he wasn't going to end up like the others. He didn't just want out, he needed out. And boxing, it wasn't just his escape, it was his prophecy. Every legend starts with a whisper. For Floyd, it was the snap of a jump rope, the sting of a jab, a boy mimicking grown men, fighting ghosts in the mirror, hoping someone, anyone might see the fire in his eyes. His father taught him the Philly shell defense not as a technique, but as a survival instinct. His uncle Roger, the Black Mamba, added venom to his strikes. And somewhere between dodging bullets on the street and ducking uppercuts in the ring, Floyd transformed. Not into a man, but into a weapon, controlled, precise, relentless. A weapon that was learning, calculating, evolving. A boy no more, but fate, always a trickster, had more trials in store. In 1993, his father, the man who molded him, broke him, built him again, was swallowed by the prison system. Drug charges, another headline, another heartbreak. Floyd, still a teenager, found himself back in Grand Rapids, this time with no compass, no trainer, no plan. But then, a twist no screenwriter could predict. A man named Don Hale, a white entrepreneur from the same streets, took him in, gave him a bed, gave him a chance. Didn't ask for punches, just passion. And in that unexpected household, Floyd began to rise. Not as a fighter, but as a force of nature. They called him Pretty Boy, not for the way he looked, but for the way he didn't get hit. At age 10, he entered the amateur ring, and it was clear, this kid wasn't normal. There was a rhythm to him, a cruel poetry. Opponents didn't just lose, they were dissected, 1 round at a time. 3 golden gloves, dozens of wins. Coaches whispering that they'd never seen anything like it. But Floyd wasn't chasing trophies. He was chasing ghosts. The ones from his childhood. The ones that told him he'd never make it. And the more he fought, the quieter those ghosts became. For now. The 1996 Olympics were supposed to be his coronation. Atlanta, the world watching, the pressure suffocating. And Floyd delivered, until he didn't. A controversial loss to Bulgaria's Todorov left him with bronze and a burning sense of betrayal. The judges may have picked a winner, but the world saw who truly dominated. Still, Floyd smiled. Publicly. Privately, he broke. That loss didn't shatter him, it ignited him. Because sometimes the biggest fire starts from the smallest spark. And in that moment, Floyd made a vow. Never again would he leave his fate in the hands of others. From now on, he'd control every round, every punch, every dollar. Turning pro wasn't a transition, It was a declaration. October 1996, lightweight division, Mayweather steps into the ring, and it's not just a fight, it's an unveiling. 11 wins in 12 months, opponents falling like dominoes. Las Vegas becoming his new playground, his proving ground. And in his hometown of Grand Rapids, a surreal moment. 3 Mayweathers fighting on the same night. A family of warriors each throwing fists into history. But even then, Floyd wasn't satisfied. He didn't want to win, he wanted to dominate. And every time his gloves touched canvas, he wasn't just boxing, he was rewriting his own story, one round at a time. But with greatness comes greed. And soon Floyd found himself tangled in a different kind of fight. The business of boxing. Top rank, Bob Arum, contracts, clauses, and a check that didn't match the hype. Mayweather wanted millions. Top rank wanted patience. That patience ran out fast. So Floyd did what Floyd does. He spoke. Loudly, boldly, called out champions, insulted legends, made headlines. Some called it arrogance. He called it strategy. Because trash talk wasn't just noise, it was bait, and people bit. They watched, they listened. And Floyd, the self-promoter, became just as dangerous as Floyd, the boxer. The world had no choice now but to look. By 1998, the target was clear. Renato Hernandez, a veteran, a champion, a warrior. But to Floyd, he was just the next step. The buildup was tense. Analysts unsure. Critics wary. Could this 21-year-old kid really dethrone a man with 40 fights and only one loss to De La Hoya? Floyd didn't flinch. He never did. October 3rd arrived, and under the bright lights, Mayweather put on a clinic. Speed, precision, defense so slick it made grown men gasp. After 8 rounds, the corner threw in the towel. It wasn't a fight, it was an exorcism. And as Hernandez faded into retirement, a new king was crowned. The Mayweather era had begun. You'd think, after becoming world champion, the fire might dim. But Floyd's hunger only grew. Power wasn't just in his hands, it was in the way he controlled the narrative. His first title defense was a statement. Angelo Manfredi, nicknamed El Diablo, came in with confidence, fire, and a dream. Floyd turned that dream into a nightmare. 2 rounds. That's all it took. Manfredi barely landed a glove. Critics said the stoppage was too early, but Floyd wasn't concerned with critics. He wasn't boxing for their approval. He was boxing to build a legacy. And every fight, every punch was another brick in the wall he was building sky high. Titles don't make legends, dominance does. And Floyd was rewriting the definition. After Manfredi, he dismantled Carlos Rios and then destroyed Justin Juco, a heavy hitter with knockout power. Juco couldn't even find Floyd in the ring. It was like chasing a ghost, one who hit back. Each defense solidified the idea that Mayweather wasn't just a champion, he was a phenomenon. A fighter who didn't fight your fight, he forced you to play by his rules. The world began whispering what Floyd had always shouted, maybe this kid was the best, not just in his weight class, but in the world, maybe ever. But for Floyd, maybe was never enough. In 2001, he made the jump to the lightweight division. A new weight, a new challenge, a new chance to prove he wasn't just a flash in the pan. First up, Jose Luis Castillo, a warhorse with grit and grit again. In their first bout, it was brutal. Castillo pushed Floyd to places he hadn't been. Some said Castillo won, some said it was close. But Floyd, he didn't leave it to debate. He gave him a rematch and made the answer clear. Dominance reasserted, questions silenced, and Mayweather kept climbing, because standing still was never an option. As he moved through the weight classes, something incredible happened. Floyd didn't slow down. Most fighters, they lose a step as they bulk up. Not him. He got sharper, slicker, smarter. He was solving opponents like math problems, dissecting their habits, exploiting their flaws. It wasn't violence, it was art. Defensive mastery that made the crowd gasp and the opponents swing at shadows. The shoulder roll, the counter, the pivot. He was reinventing what defense could look like, turning survival into spectacle. While others relied on power, Floyd relied on precision. And in doing so, he made boxing about thinking again, about mastery. But behind the gloves and the bravado, the pretty boy was evolving. He was becoming something else, something more dangerous. Money Mayweather, a persona, a brand, a business. He wasn't just boxing anymore. He was marketing himself. Flashy watches, extravagant cars, stacks of cash on camera. Critics called it arrogance. Floyd called it freedom. Every diamond he wore, every bill he flaunted, was a middle finger to the teaching lessons in value, in resilience, in the cost of shortcuts. He had learned young that shortcuts came with scars, and if he could spare them that pain, even a fraction, then maybe, just maybe, the sacrifices would mean something more. Critics often say Floyd was too safe, that he avoided wars, but they miss the point entirely. He didn't need wars because war implies risk. Mayweather was a tactician, a surgeon. Why brawl when you can outthink? Why get hit when you can vanish? That wasn't fear, that was evolution. Fighters who chased knockouts often ended up in hospital beds. Floyd chased clarity, clean hits, clean exits. He wasn't trying to survive boxing. He was trying to conquer it, and he understood something most didn't. In this game, the real damage wasn't always visible. It showed up years later, in slurred words, in forgotten names, in regrets. The final chapter, or so it seemed, was etched in gold. 50-0, a perfect record, a flawless resume. But for Floyd, numbers weren't just milestones. They were armor. Every zero was a shield against history's doubters. But even as the record stood immortal, the man behind it remained complex. Humble to those he trusted, cold to those who questioned. His contradictions made him magnetic. You didn't always agree with him, but you watched. Because he didn't just fight opponents, he fought the narrative. And more often than not, he won. Not because he silenced critics, but because he never needed their applause in the first place. Floyd Mayweather was never just about boxing. He was about control, the ability to dictate not just the fight, but the entire experience. The walk-in, the press tour, the purse split, the retirement. Even his comeback was on his terms. And that's what separates icons from the rest. They don't bend to the world, they shape it. Floyd shaped every aspect of his reality, turned critics into advertisers, turned controversy into currency. And while others fought for belts, he fought for equity, ownership, freedom, because the ring was only part of his empire. The real game? That was played in boardrooms, and he was winning there too. He didn't just beat legends, he erased doubts. Diego Corrales, Zab Judah, Arturo Gatti, Manny Pacquiao. Each fight was a piece of his mosaic, and together they told a story not of brutality, but of brilliance. He wasn't trying to hurt, he was trying to master. And through that mastery, he became the standard, the name whispered by rising boxers in every gym. You want to be the next Mayweather? They'd nod. They'd train harder. But what they didn't always see was the sacrifice, the loneliness, the discipline that outlasted motivation. Because Floyd didn't chase greatness. He became its embodiment, its reflection, its architect. And yet, for all the victories, the cars, the headlines, one question lingers. Was it worth it? The childhood lost, the relationship strained, the constant pressure to be perfect, the need to protect the legacy at all costs. Was immortality enough to fill the silence after the crowds faded? That's the haunting part of greatness. It's loud on the outside, but often quiet on the inside. And for a man who mastered every round, every opponent, every narrative, this may be the only question he can't fully answer. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the price of greatness isn't paid in the ring. Maybe it's paid after. Even after the gloves were hung up, Floyd never really left the ring. He just changed arenas. Now it was microphones instead of mitts, investments instead of combinations. But the fight never stopped. He fought for relevance in a world that quickly forgets. He fought to turn his brand into a kingdom. And most of all, he fought to remind people that he was still here, undefeated not just in boxing, but in life. He didn't crave the spotlight, he commanded it. Because Mayweather was no longer a name. It was a monument, built on sweat, doubt, and an unrelenting refusal to be ordinary. Social media became his second ring. Every post, a jab. Every flash of wealth, a hook. Critics rolled their eyes, fans devoured it. Floyd wasn't showing off. He was documenting victory. For every kid who grew up broke. For every dreamer told to be realistic. His money wasn't just money, it was a message. They said I couldn't. I did. You can too. And whether you believed in that message or not, you saw it. You watched it. Because like every great fighter, Floyd knew how to sell the sizzle and then back it up with steak. Even if you hated it, you couldn't look away. But what happens when you run out of challengers? When you've climbed every mountain, silenced every doubt, and claimed every prize? For most, that's where the story ends. For Floyd, it was just another opening bell. He didn't chase comfort. He chased challenges in new forms, promoting rising stars, mentoring future legends, building an empire from behind the scenes. He wasn't just teaching jabs and footwork. He was teaching mindset, patience, positioning, power, and perhaps most importantly, self-worth. He had learned the hard way what most fighters don't until it's too late, that the real fight begins after the final round. Still, ghosts lingered, the ones from childhood, the ones from decisions that couldn't be reversed. Fame doesn't erase the past, it only illuminates it. And Floyd, for all his mastery, was still human beneath the armor. Every so often, the cracks would show, in interviews, in silence, in his eyes. A glimpse of the boy who saw his father bleed, who watched his mother fade, who clung to boxing not just for glory, but for survival. And that's what people often forget. Floyd didn't chase greatness for applause. He chased it because he was afraid of what would happen if he stopped. Fear is a powerful fuel. It can break you, or it can make you unbeatable. Floyd chose the latter. He used fear as a guide, never a jailer. And in doing so, he controlled it. The fear of losing, the fear of poverty, the fear of fading away. Every morning run, every ice bath, every silent, lonely night in the gym, long after everyone had left. It was all a form of control. He didn't trust talent alone. He trusted preparation. And if that meant outworking everyone on earth, so be it. Because in Floyd's world, fear wasn't the enemy, it was the coach. Some called him cold, others calculated, but those closest knew the truth. Floyd was focused, laser focused. He didn't have time for distractions, because distractions got you hurt. In boxing, in business, in life. He'd seen what happened when focus slipped. Careers ended, fortunes vanished, families shattered. So he built walls around his routine, around his people, around his heart. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to let anything risk what he'd built. That discipline? It wasn't just for the ring, it was his life's foundation. And even in retirement, he protected it like a title belt. And then there's the silence. The thing few talk about. The thing every great fighter eventually faces. The roar fades. The checks slow. The relevance dims. For most, it's unbearable. But Floyd? He made peace with it. Or at least, he tried. Because he'd seen too many legends chase that roar back into oblivion. He wasn't going to be one of them. If he returned, it was on his terms. For spectacle. For legacy. For control. Never desperation. And that's why, even in stillness, Mayweather moves differently. He's not just trying to live. He's trying to last. Legacy, after all, is more than numbers, more than titles. It's the fingerprints you leave behind on the world. Floyd's fingerprints are everywhere. In the defensive styles copied by rising fighters, in the business models reshaped by his independence, in the lives he touched with quiet charity and bold inspiration. He wasn't just a boxer. He was a blueprint, a lesson in what happens when talent meets obsession. When a kid from Grand Rapids rewrites every rule and forces the world to not just respect him, but study him, analyze him, debate him, because even in retirement, he remains undefeated in influence. Still, there's always the whisper, the one every great hears. Come back. One more. Prove it again. Floyd hears it too, maybe louder than most. And every now and then, he flirts with it. An exhibition here, a tease there. Not because he needs the money, but because the ring was never just about income. It was about identity. And the truth is, Floyd Mayweather might never fully leave it behind. Because when your life has been a fight since the day you were born, peace feels strange, foreign, almost like defeat, and Floyd never learned how to lose. So now he stands at the intersection of myth and memory, a figure larger than life, yet rooted in pain. A man who built a fortress from fear and a throne from discipline. A fighter who redefined an entire era, not just with punches, but with presence. But even now, even after all the cameras fade and the rings fall silent, one question remains unanswered. Is this truly the end? Or is greatness, once claimed, something that refuses to be finished? Floyd Mayweather may be done with boxing, but maybe boxing isn't done with him. When a fighter steps through the ropes, he carries more than gloves. He carries a story, his pain, his pride, his past. For Floyd, every fight was a chapter, not just in his career, but in his survival. He wasn't just dodging punches, he was dodging fate. The fate of so many before him who rose fast, fell faster, and were forgotten just as quickly. But Mayweather was writing a different story, one where pain had purpose, where struggle was sculpted into strategy. And as the bell rang each time, the world watched not just to see who he'd beat, but how he'd keep beating the odds. And it wasn't just the odds in the ring, it was the ones outside it. In a world that often chews up its heroes and spits them out, Floyd endured, not untouched, not invincible, but intact. The scandals came, the media turned, people tried to strip away the aura. But even when his name was dragged through the headlines, his presence never wavered. He faced the world not with apologies, but with unflinching defiance. Not to prove he was perfect, but to prove he was unbreakable. Because he knew, when you stop flinching, the punches don't land the same. And Floyd hadn't flinched in decades. People often search for the key to his success. Was it his genetics, his training, his timing? But the truth is simpler and far more complicated. It was his mindset, a refusal to settle, a constant hunger. Floyd never let a win become a pillow. He let it become a challenge. What's next? Who's next? How can I do it better? His mind was his weapon, sharper than any jab, colder than any stare, because boxing to him was a game of inches. Not just in the ring, but in discipline, in strategy, in everything. And Floyd Mayweather never left an inch to chance. That mindset turned him into more than an athlete. It made him a mirror. Fans saw in him what they feared or desired most: discipline, arrogance, control, rebellion. To some, he was a hero. To others, a villain. But the beauty of Mayweather was that he never asked to be either. He just was. And in being himself unapologetically, he challenged people to look inward. Why did they boo him? Why did they cheer? What did his success say about their failures? And in that uncomfortable reflection, Floyd did what few could. He turned every audience into participants, in his story, in their own. But even legends aren't immune to time. The hands slow, the body aches, and the spotlight, once blinding, begins to dim. Floyd saw it coming, prepared for it, but still it stung. Not because he feared irrelevance, but because the ring had been his sanctuary, his confession booth, his battlefield, his home. And walking away from it wasn't just leaving a job, it was leaving a piece of himself. But if there's one thing Mayweather knew better than any fighter who ever lived, it's when to walk, how to exit before the fall, to end on his terms. Because in the end, control was the only title that ever mattered. There's a strange silence that follows the end of a storm. For Floyd, retirement wasn't filled with tears or trophies, it was filled with questions. Who am I without the fight? What do I do with a world that no longer demands my blood? And in that silence, he found something rare: clarity, the chance to be something more than a fighter, to be a father, a mentor, a mogul. He didn't need to throw punches to make an impact anymore. He could build, invest, guide, inspire, and maybe, just maybe, the second act of his life could be even more powerful than the first. Still, not everyone understood. They wanted more fights, more drama, more blood. But Floyd had already given everything. Every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every scar. What more did they want? That's the curse of greatness. It makes people greedy. They forget the cost. They see the wins but not the wounds. And Floyd, despite his wealth, his fame, his legacy, was still human, still vulnerable, still carrying the weight of expectations that no man should bear alone. But he carried them anyway, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And that choice, that's what made him different. And so he walks forward, not as the man he was, but as the legend he became, untouched by defeat, unmatched in discipline, unapologetic in legacy. He doesn't need validation. He is the validation. For every fighter rising now, he's the blueprint. For every business-minded athlete, he's the example. And for every kid who's told they're too loud, too confident, too much, Floyd is the proof that too much can become just enough if you're willing to own it. He turned doubt into dollars, hate into headlines, and in doing so, became the architect of his own immortality. But legacy, real legacy, isn't just measured in titles, it's measured in transformation. And Floyd didn't just transform boxing, he transformed the business of it. He forced networks to pay more, fighters to demand better, fans to expect spectacle. He was the disruptor, the innovator, the storm that changed the weather. And even if another goes undefeated, even if someone someday lands 51 wins, the blueprint remains his. Because he did it his way, with style, with substance, and without compromise. That's the kind of legacy no number can match. That's the kind of story that doesn't end. It echoes, and maybe that's the final punchline. That greatness doesn't retire, it reverberates. In every gym, every glove, every dream. It whispers to the next generation, daring them to rise, to push, to believe. Floyd Mayweather may have stopped fighting, but the echo of his footsteps still shakes the canvas. His voice still echoes in every corner where someone dares to be more than what the world expects. And so the legend walks on, not into the shadows, but into myth. And somewhere in a quiet gym, a kid laces up his gloves, shadow boxes with a dream, and believes, because Floyd showed him how. Every era has a name, and for nearly 2 decades, that name was Mayweather. Not because he fought the most, but because he fought the smartest. Not because he roared, but because he whispered truths between punches. He didn't leave bruises, he left blueprints. And when his story is told, it won't just be about what he did, it'll be about what he changed. He didn't follow the system, he outgrew it, then outbuilt it. And as time marches on, more will realize. He wasn't just a product of the game, he was the prototype for the next one. But what do you do when the world's already heard your story? You evolve, reinvent. Floyd didn't rest on his record, he turned it into real estate, into fashion lines, into businesses that moved quietly but earned loudly. While others waited for the next big fight, Floyd created his next big empire. He didn't need to trade punches to make headlines anymore. His moves in silence hit just as hard. And in doing so, he proved something every fighter dreams but rarely achieves. That legacy doesn't stop when the gloves come off. Sometimes it starts there. Still, you can't escape your beginning. No matter how high you climb, the street stays in your shadow. And Grand Rapids never left him. It lived in his walk, his tone, his mistrust, his fight. It reminded him that the world doesn't hand you peace. You fight for it. And maybe that's why he kept pushing, because he remembered what it was like to have nothing, to be overlooked, to be doubted. And each time he stepped into that ring, it wasn't just for glory, it was to bury those doubts 6 feet under with every perfect round. People always asked, what made Floyd different? Was it the training, the speed, the defense? But those were symptoms, not causes. The real answer was simpler. He never stopped being hungry. Not for money, not for fame, but for control, for freedom. He watched too many legends become cautionary tales. He refused to be one. And that refusal, that raw, relentless refusal to be anything but in control, made him not just the best of his generation, but something rarer, untouchable. Because for all the belts he wore, the real prize was always ownership of his career, of his choices, of his name. And that name, Mayweather, it became more than a name. It became a challenge, a weight, a legacy passed down not through blood, but through example. He showed the world what happens when discipline meets vision, when pain is turned into power, when silence is broken by swagger. He wasn't just telling kids to dream, He was handing them the manual. And every now and then, when one of them makes it out, when they raise their hands to the sky after a hard-won fight, you'll see it. A flash of that stance, a whisper of that swagger, a piece of Floyd. But every monument casts a long shadow, and for all his light, Floyd's legacy isn't without darkness. The controversies, the feuds, the moments where the man behind the myth reminded us he was mortal. But maybe that's the point. Maybe perfection isn't the absence of flaws, it's the power to overcome them, to stand in the fire and not burn, to rise when others fold. And Floyd, he didn't just survive the spotlight, he outshone it. Not because he was flawless, but because he was relentless. And that relentlessness, it's what turned a fighter into a phenomenon. Even now, the story isn't over. You'll hear rumors, comebacks, exhibitions, whispers of one more. But none of that matters, because Floyd already wrote his ending. He walked away at the top, unscathed, unmatched, unapologetic. That doesn't mean the world won't keep chasing him, but every time they try to drag him back, he'll remind them. Legends don't need comebacks. They just need time. And Floyd's already ahead of it. Because while others age, while their names fade, his keeps echoing. Not just in arenas, but in ambition, in hustle, in legacy. Somewhere a young fighter tapes up his hands. He's broke, unknown, hungry. But in his mind, he's already in Vegas, already under the lights. And when he thinks of who showed him the way, who turned boxing from a blood sport into a business, from a fight into a future, he thinks of one name, not Ali, not Tyson, Mayweather. Because Floyd didn't just build a path, he bulldozed one. And that kid, he walks it, never once doubting if greatness is possible. Because Floyd made it inevitable, for those bold enough to believe. So maybe the final round isn't in the ring, maybe it's in the ripple, the aftershock. The moments when a story you thought was over starts shaping a new one. That's where Mayweather lives now, in the echoes, in the boardrooms where athletes now ask for ownership, in the gyms where trainers whisper, study his defense, in the minds of every doubter proven wrong and every dreamer proven right. He's not fighting anymore. He's influencing, and sometimes that hits even harder, because long after the final bell, Mayweather is still undefeated in impact. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there's a feeling, a tension, the sense that we haven't seen the last of him, because legends don't fade, they adapt. And Floyd Mayweather? He's never been one to bow out quietly. He walks the earth like a loaded glove, polished and poised, waiting for the right moment. Maybe not for another fight, but for another move, another empire, another chapter. And when it comes, it won't be loud at first, just a whisper, a headline, a spark, until once again all eyes turn to the man who mastered the art of making the world stop and watch.